my in Arabic, so I will give some times to let non-Arabic speaker to switch to the English channel.
إن شاء الله. مرحبا بكم ونحن جاهزين إن شاء الله. تختار أي لغة تتحدث بها، إما الإنجليزية أو العربية.
بارك الله فيك. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أصحاب السعادة، السيدات السادة، نرحب بكم في الندوة 12 والأخيرة، وذلك من ضمن الندوات في الحوار الدولي دور التمويل الاجتماعي الإسلامي في تحقيق أهداف التنمية المستدامة. إذا رأينا خلال ال 12 ندوة التي قمنا بها تسلسلت بثلاثة يعني كاتيجوري أو ثلاثة مجموعات. المجموعة الأولى كانت تتكلم عن أهمية التمويل الاجتماعي الإسلامي وكيفية الاستفادة من التمويل الاجتماعي الإسلامي ودور التمويل الاجتماعي الإسلامي. وكذا بعد ما تطرقنا إلى هذه المجموعة، ثم أخذنا مجموعة ندوات تطرقنا فيها عن نظام الأمم المتحدة ومنظمات الأمم المتحدة، وفي الأخير وآخر مجموعة كانت تكلمنا على قصص النجاح فيما يتعلق بمنظمات الأمم المتحدة وكيفية تنفيذها للتمويل الاجتماعي، سواء كان الزكاة أو الأوقاف أو التمويلات الأخرى أو الأدوات الأخرى في التمويل الاجتماعي الإسلامي. اليوم احنا في الندوة 12 وهي الأخيرة، وهنا حقيقة أتقدم بالشكر الجزيل لبنك التنمية الإسلامي على هذه الشراكة التي اشتركنا معها مع البنك الإسلامي، ودور حقيقة بنك التنمية الإسلامي في إنجاح هذه السلسلة من الندوات، والتي نتطلع إلى كذلك نجاح الآلية التي سوف تكون. كما أن الشكر موصول للأسكوا على ما قامت به في استضافة هذه الندوات. ونحن اليوم في آخر ندوة، والتي سوف تكون حقيقة ندوة مهمة، وأأمل أن تكون كذلك تكون يعني انتراكتيف وتكون متواصلة ونتحصل على الأسئلة، لأن فيما بعد نحن نتوقع أن نخرج بآلية وتقرير. هذا التقرير راح يكون هو اللبنة الأولى في بناء الآلية التي نتطلع لها، والتي تهدف إلى يعني وضع وإتاحة الفرصة لكافة المؤسسات وكذلك الأفراد، سواء كانوا في الدول الإسلامية أو في غير الدول الإسلامية، بأن يكون هناك آلية يستطيعون دفع زكاتهم عبر هذه الآلية، وهذه الآلية تتوافق والشريعة الإسلامية. أتمنى كل التوفيق للمتحدثين، وأشكرهم مقدما على كذلك حضورهم، وكذلك الشكر الموصول للحضور الكريم. ونتمنى ندوة تفاعلية ما بين المتحدثين الذين يعني سيقدمون لنا التقديم خلال هذه الندوة، والتي سوف تكون كذلك فرصة لتبادل الأفكار والخبرات من خلال تقديمهم لعروضهم التقديمية. وشكرا.
جزاكم الله خير الجزاء الدكتور مريخي بهذه الكلمة الطيبة، وبمشاركتكم في هذا البرنامج من بدايته إلى نهايته. ونتمنى إن شاء الله أن تكون هذه الفرصة فرصة التي يعني تنفع المجتمع في الدول العالم كلها. جزاكم الله أحسن الجزاء، وسنستمر إن شاء الله بهذا البرنامج. Ladies and gentlemen, that was the special advisor to the UN Secretary General, Dr. Merehi, who has been with us from the beginning of this series, and we are glad that he has been part of this seminar from the beginning to the 12th, which is the final one. Now I will move to the next speaker, and I think I'm so thrilled when I saw the name of our speaker as one of the people to speak. He is an intellectual, an economist, a development expert, and an administrator. And for us here at the Islamic Development Bank is a name that we always look forward to hearing from because of his insightful thoughts on a number of global issues. He is no other than Dr. Mahmoud Muhyiddin, who is an economist with more than 30 years of experience in international finance and development. He is an executive director at the International Monetary Fund and has been United Nations Special Envoy on financing the 2030 Development Agenda since the year February 2020. Formerly, he was Minister of Investment of Egypt from 2004 to 2010, and most recently served as the World Bank Group Senior Vice President for the 2030 Development Agenda. His resume is impressive. I can continue reading it. He holds a PhD in economics from the University of Warwick in the United Kingdom, a master's degree in economics and social analysis from the University of York, United Kingdom, and a diploma of development economics from the University of Warwick. He also has a BSc in economics from Cairo University. Dr. Mahmoud Muhyiddin is going to speak about the challenges of UN mechanisms. Dr. Mahmoud Muhyiddin, let me first of all say a very big welcome to you, and we are happy that you're here, and I would like to give the floor to you to lead us for the next 15 minutes to discuss these issues of UN mechanisms as it relates to Islamic social finance and sustainable development goals. Welcome.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you so much for this very generous introduction. I'm very pleased to join the discussion today, and it's good that with the good coordination and leadership of Dr. Marikhi and his team, the excellent work of our colleagues at the Islamic Development Bank and ESQA, and colleagues as well of the Office of the Secretary General and the Deputy Secretary General at this series has been developing in the good way that we're expecting, and more with this kind of enthusiastic participation in its activities. And as mentioned by Dr. Marikhi, we are expecting and hoping that the outcomes of the discussions are going to be reflected in the framework that's being designed to support the implementation and the achievement of the SDGs through Islamic finance and Islamic social finance. I think the discussion that we are having today is very timely and a strong reminder of the importance of Islamic finance, including its social dimensions, to support the efforts towards achieving the SDGs after almost 2 tough years around the world in dealing with the COVID-19 crisis and its impact on lives and livelihoods of people around the world. And as you may have seen, the Secretary General of the United Nations issued our common agenda, and I encourage you all to have a look at it, because it covers the different dimensions of the 2030 development agenda, and putting the SDGs implementation again on an accelerator. I'm saying again because the intention was to start strong by the beginning of this decade, but as we know, the events of the last 2 years didn't really help many countries doing that. But it's a very strong reminder of what the humanity had been suffering from, that that kind of suffering was because of neglect of one of the important aspects related to the SDGs, which is SDG 3 about health. And even in some advanced economies, the health systems were not adequately prepared to deal with the crisis. And as been established from the very beginning of the implementation of the SDGs, there were 3 important pillars that were suggested after many years of experience with development and development finance, including during the era of the Millennium Development Goals, or the MDGs. First one is data or evidence. Our solutions should be evidence-based. The second is the importance of finance from all of its sources. The Finance for Development framework is reminding us that we do not really have the luxury of preference of one type of finance over the other. The gaps are huge, and we need really to mobilize public, private, external, and domestic sources of finance to achieve the SDGs. And the final point is basically about effective implementation. You may have the evidence, you may have some finance or even adequate finance, but without high quality of implementation they call it today, at the last mile, where it matters, in the towns and the villages, in the remote areas, that will not really be getting us where we want to be. In that context, the framework of the SDGs, the recent developments, the prospects of the coming years, I like to speak about the role of Islamic finance, Islamic social finance. And when I was preparing my participation in one of the events, I remember at the time, I think that was either the first or the second series of the seminars I was in Lebanon. And at the time, it was not really easy even to have an electricity connection or a Wi-Fi connection. And this is in a country that was relatively with these kind of expected qualities of life just few years ago before the shocks. So these kind of shocks that we're suffering from the global perspective or at the country level or at the townships and villages are reminding us of the importance of solidarity and reminding us as well that finance should be coming in a context. In Islamic finance, Islamic social finance, there is no finance for finance. There is no money chasing money. There is always an underlying asset. There is always a purpose. That purpose could be a substantive fiscal development, building a bridge, building a school, building a hospital, paving a road. But as well, it is on the substance of the investments in human capital where it matters, in health, education, and social solidarity. And I remember when we had the discussions with the Deputy Secretary General and with the President of the Islamic Development Bank, that was during the months of Ramadan, last Ramadan, and Dr. Marikhi was there, and the Executive Secretary of ESQA was with us as well. There were lots of discussions about how can we get ourselves from the current crisis and build it back better using every element that we may have in our culture and our financial systems. So we need to take a very pragmatic approach when it comes to finance here. If a culture is producing a good alternative that has been working successfully, if a culture is providing some good ethical framework for that finance to do its impact, we should encourage it and we need to include it in the system. And perhaps, as Professor Rogov, the very well-known economist and the former chief economist of the IMF, when he put it after the global financial crisis, there could be much to learn from the experience of Islamic finance being equity-based. And here the equity-based is not just a formula. It is not just the profit sharing formula that we are using, but it's basically the concept and the principles that are underlying this kind of relationship for risk sharing and benefit sharing at the same time. I remember when we had this meeting with the DSG, the Deputy Secretary General, as I mentioned, there were some discussions as well about the prospects of the economy going forward. Building back better for some advanced economies was easy. In relative terms, they have the purse, they have the capacity. Some of the countries spent more than 25% of their GDP They have the vaccination available, actually, and unfortunately, in some of the developed and advanced economies or rich countries, there are some vaccines wasted, estimated to be around 100 million vaccines, not benefiting anyone, poor or rich. So there is something very wrong in the fairness of dealing with matters when you see people with a lack of the essentials, and you see some sort of surpluses wasted. So here it's not just talking about the financial transactions. It's basically talking about the framework of cooperation, solidarity, support that could really come with Islamic finance. So let's talk about the figures. I reminded myself and your good selves about the importance of data and evidence. So the gap of finance for achieving the SDGs from its inception had been around $2.5 to $3 trillion. What happened? $1 trillion around the world. And that is the estimate of the OECD, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. What happened after the COVID, that the gap got wider because we spent more in dealing with the crisis and the needs are still there. So the gap is more than $4.2 trillion as being estimated. Meanwhile, there have been a lot of developments in alternative means of funding. Globally, I'm citing some figures, and then I rely here on ESPA, Islamic Development Bank, and the rest of the researchers to get all of these figures right, because the data are suffering from some sort of serious discrepancy. But even the minimum of annual zakat flows is around $200 billion. This is the minimum, $200 billion. But we saw figures exceeding $1 trillion. Here's some sort of serious work and collection. I know it's hard because lots of the zakat-based transactions got unnoticed from a person to a person, but there are always good economic models and good surveys and good samples that could really help us having a better assessment, or at least to get this kind of gap, 200 billion to 1 trillion is really huge. But as I said, even the minimum of it is very important, very significant, that we need to rely on. Islamic social financing had been proven as well to be one of the largest forms of wealth transfer to the poor, and it has been done in a very dynamic way. It doesn't need somebody to push it. It's not really coming through tax collectors, but there is the behavior of altruism, the behavior of spontaneous reactions to events through sadaqat as well. So in addition to the obligation of zakat, you have as well the sadaqat. And many people, and we are approaching nicely and smoothly, inshallah, the months of Ramadan. And this is the time that we need to think of that season. I know many people who are considering paying their zakat and sadaqat during this month. And that would remind us of a commitment between the Islamic Development Bank, ESPA, and the UN of an interesting figure that we need really to see what's happening in it, 100 million, but I'll come back to the end. In some countries, the market share of Islamic finance is under 10%, but the percentage of Muslims who report engaging in zakat can be as high as 70% of them based on samples and surveys. The UN system has been working in partnership with many countries with the belief of partnerships. I'm very happy that our great moderator reminded us of our emphasis on SDG 17 on partnerships within the countries, partnerships across the countries. So thank you so much, Brother Jamil, for reminding us of this important concept. So let's see what UNDP, for instance, have been doing, because it's important to come from that 40,000 feet high kind of discussion into what's happening in reality at the country and the village level. The UNDP, the United Nations Development Program, has been very active, especially with the Awqaf endowments. I remember my first paper, a research paper on Islamic finance, I think I did back in 1993. And I remember that the concepts of awqaf and zakat and how best we can unleash their potential and how can we mobilize them better was an issue of concern for previous researchers that I quoted. So what I'm saying now about the importance of awqaf is not new. I quoted people back in 1993 who were being saying, let's do a better job in development and development finance using zakat and awqaf. And we see a lot of scattered effort, but that needs really to be enhanced and mobilized further. So UNDP, in coordination with Waqf of Indonesia, the national body of awqaf and endowments of Indonesia, they managed to set the Waqf core principles to help channel some of the country's $27 billion of awqaf assets to the SDGs. And you go around the Muslim world, you'll see many examples, endowments and assets. Some of these assets are being utilized very effectively, and some of these assets need to be enhanced and to make them with an impact by transferring these assets into good flows to develop the human capital, the infrastructure, and to support the work of solidarity. UNDP has engaged as well with Basnas Indonesia, which provided power to 803 homes and reached an estimated 5,000 beneficiaries. So the figures here are basically an example. I gave you the big figures of the 27 billion, but I tell you as well, at the micro level, you can do a lot. And if it is feasible at that scale, what we can do is to scale it up and perhaps to have the demonstration effect to repeat it somewhere else. In Saudi Arabia, the UNDP with the rest of the UN country team did some good work as well in assessing the quantity of contribution of awqaf to the SDGs through the National Development Plan. This is on the technical side. UNDP also worked with the Indonesian Ministry of Finance to support the issuance of their first $1.3 billion of sovereign green sukuk. And this is very much important as well, because you see this kind of great interest now on the on sukuk issuance around the world. Many of the countries have now their own new legal framework for sukuk, which are basically like bonds, but with different features, with different variability, with different underlying assumptions on how they function. So these are basically examples coming from the field, be them small, like having access to electricity in 800 households, or mobilizing huge assets of zakat and awqaf, zakat fund and awqaf, or helping in the support of the issuance of sukuk. And as you know, the sukuk instrument is one of the most popular instruments now and the fast growing element of Islamic finance. So through the objectives of the Islamic finance and the work of the commercial business of Islamic finance, we'll see it aligned with the SDGs. I did a paper with Professor Habib Ahmed of Durham University back in 2015 as a draft, published in 2016, just a few months after the launching of the SDGs, establishing in that piece the interlinkages between Islamic finance, including its social component, with financial stability, financial inclusion, because Islamic finance, especially the social components, can go where some other alternative traditional means of funding cannot reach. We demonstrated the social impact, and we said as well on infrastructure, including on green sukuk, we can do a good job. Other examples that we can share, but mindful of your time, I'm just giving these examples at the village level, at the country level, and at international cooperation kind of level, if you are considering the green sukuk with social dimension, with earmarking their activities with social impact, and having as well the more interesting and innovative work related to zakat funds and to the waqf. This brings me to some concluding remarks. And again, Dr. Marikhi would recall when we were talking about the accelerator and the ACT accelerator for health, that's to support countries in need and lacking access to health support and the vaccine. So the ACT accelerator was in need of money and still in need of money. And then we said back in that high-level event in May, during the launch of this initiative, that we need to mobilize $100 million. And I remember the president of the Islamic Development Bank then said it's a very good idea and we can start. And through the excellent network of Dr. Marikhi and others, and we're here all to help, we need to count the days. There are few weeks left until we reach Ramadan, inshallah, and we need really to have some sort of consideration on how to mobilize these funds and how to earmark better to the health recovery as one of the biggest constraints that we are facing today. The other thing I like to mention is that initiative that the Islamic Development Bank participated in September with the United Nations Secretary General. The president of the Islamic Development Bank was there. He delivered a very compelling argument and speech on jobs, inclusion, and social protection, using Islamic finance and the social dimensions of Islamic finance to do that. There is a very important initiative led by the ILO on the job, another accelerator. It's the Jobs and Social Protection Accelerator. So I talked about the ACT accelerator in Islamic finance side, and I'm talking now about Islamic finance side for health. Now I'm talking as well about the issue of ACT accelerator for another accelerator for social protection and job creation, and that was done as an initiative on the 28th of September 2021 at the margins of UNGA 76. And I'm happy that ESPAN, the Islamic Development Bank, are with us as well with the rest of colleagues from the UN system and the ILO to support the implementation of this accelerator, because it requires finance and it requires solidarity and it has a social implication. There is no better way to protect the people than providing them with decent jobs. So we're ending this year and we're hoping that next year, inshallah, would be a better one, but we need really to manage the risks. We need to apply fully the principles of partnerships, and what we see today of fears of inflation in the markets, what we see of some worries about even some stagflationary fears. This means that some countries will be seeing some slowdown in their growth and some concerns about employment. And at the same time, there will be these inflationary pressures. This means that some of the essentials, including food products, health support, would be in more need. And here, while we're relying on our macroeconomists and the central banks and the ministries of finance and the ministries of social protection and to coordinate better between the monetary and fiscal policies and to provide social protection for those who could be vulnerable to these increases in prices, especially the increases in prices of the essential goods, commodities, and services. We are relying as well on the solution that could be provided from Islamic finance, including the social aspects of it, to provide the necessary support. We shouldn't be forgetting that approximately 100 million people were added to those who are suffering from extreme poverty because of COVID. We shouldn't be forgetting that 250 million people more, based on the figures coming from the World Food Programme, have been suffering as well from malnutrition or lack of access to food. So here, this is the kind of variety that Islamic finance, Islamic social finance can provide: solutions on financial inclusion, solutions to infrastructure development, solutions to provide adequate support in partnership to achieve the SDGs. And with this, I'd like to conclude. I'd like to thank you all for this opportunity. And I'm happy that this series has been successful and look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mahmoud Muhyiddin. I wish that we have much more time so that you can continue with this insightful presentation with the facts and figures. For those who are joining us, you are here in the 12th seminar, a series that is organized by the Office of the Special Advisor to the UN Secretary General and the Islamic Development Bank, where we are discussing the role of Islamic social finance in achieving the SDGs. And today, our topic is specifically looking at the issue of UN mechanisms in achieving Islamic social finance. And that was the topic that Dr. Mahmoud Muhyiddin was just talking about, and a lot of takeaways from the discussion. Dr. Mahmoud spoke about the importance of data, gathering the evidence. He spoke about the importance of gathering and mobilizing financing. But most importantly, he also spoke about the issue of effective implementation. So for those who are joining us, Dr. Mahmoud Muhyiddin also talked about the importance of solidarity. And he said, there is nothing like finance for finance in Islamic finance. Finance has a purpose, has a context, has a way, to make an impact. And he brought some, a lot of figures that are really, really food for thought for the entire global community. About 100 million of vaccines wasted. Inequality is coming up. He also talked about the issue, the importance of, achieving the SDGs through partnerships. And then, the importance of awqaf and how to mobilize the zakat and many more, and ended with a clarion call. Thank you, Dr. Mahmoud Muhyiddin, about the number of people that have fallen into poverty again, 100 million of them. And I think people need to reflect that these are not just numbers, 100 million human beings. So Dr. Mahmoud Muhyiddin, thank you so much, and please be with us. We will need you more during the discussion session. I will now have the pleasure to go to the next speaker, who is Dr. Nida Khan, the CEO and founder of Nash FinTech. Dr. Nida, Khan, she's the CEO of a Luxembourg, startup providing software solutions specializing in blockchain and artificial intelligence. She was ranked as the 12th most influential woman in Islamic business and finance in 2019 and 2020. And prior to working as the CEO of Nash FinTech, she worked as the CTO of a Singapore-based e-commerce platform. She has also worked at the Interdisciplinary Center for Security, Reliability, and Trust in Luxembourg, where she led the research projects on ConnexCap, a French Luxembourg fintech startup. She has held numerous positions as a faculty member in Islamic financial educational institutions in India, and has worked as a research assistant on project, focusing on performance evaluation of cryptographic protocols in the University of Luxembourg. Dr. Nida, we are happy to have you here, and I'm glad that you are also an expert in Islamic finance, and so probably carrying on from where Dr. Mahmoud Muhyiddin stopped. You are going to speak about the challenges of Islamic social finance implementation. And gladly, that is one of the 3 points, key points that were identified by Dr. Mahmoud Muhyiddin, which are needed: data, financing, and implementation. Nida Khan, we are happy to have you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jamil. It's a pleasure to be here. Assalamu alaikum, everybody, and a warm welcome to all of you. I'll share my screen and just let me know when it's visible to you.
Excellent. It's visible and you can go ahead. You have 7 solid minutes.
Thank you. So basically, I'll be focusing on the role fintech or financial technology plays in alleviating some of the challenges that we see in Islamic social finance. So basically, there are 2 ways, if you focus on the figure, whereby we can achieve the Islamic social financial goals. One is that of zakat, sadaqah, and waqf, and the other is that of Islamic social banks. And in parallel, if we are able to achieve this, then we will also be achieving the UN SDG goals. Now, when we look at the challenges of zakat and sadaqah, we focus on the challenges that the donors face. The donors can be individuals, they can be governments, they can be organizations. So the first is that there is a lack of efficient distribution of funds, whether it is zakat funds or sadaqah funds, to achieve the SDG goals. Now, what we can do here is that we can use artificial intelligence. We can first, of course, demarcate the areas which are of the highest priority. So if we feel that the people who are below the poverty line, we should be focusing on them first, then we assign a certain priority to them, which is, let's say, the highest that we can assign. And then whenever a donor comes on the application, he can see the recommendations of the projects or the receivers that his funds should be going to. So the ones with the highest priority would be listed first. And this would help us to achieve a more efficient distribution of the funds. Then another thing is I saw in one of the previous seminars, it was mentioned by Dr. Ali, that the zakat funds should be targeted as per the Sharia. So the distribution should be according to the Sharia. So what we can do here is that we can use smart contracts on the blockchain platform, and we can define categories, the different, let's say there are 8 categories as per the Sharia. Then we define the categories, and whenever any project comes for in need of funding or zakat funds, or any receiver comes, we put that individual or the project under the requisite category. So when you're using smart contracts on the blockchain platform, what you will have is lots of data associated with where the funds are going to. And so you will be able to see whether there has been a targeted distribution or not. Then, of course, another challenge is that we have to focus on the eradication of poverty and hunger to ensure that there is sustainable development. Now, what happens in this scenario is that, for example, if you're living in the US and you want to give some donation of a couple of dollars, the amount of transaction fee would be so high that you would be prevented from, going forward with that donation of a couple of dollars. So what we need in the market are micropayment solutions, which help us to achieve the donation of a couple of dollars without incurring a huge transaction fee. So the transaction fee should be in fractions of a cent. We can, of course, use the blockchain platforms for this, not Bitcoin and Ethereum, which are not green, but the newer ones that have come into the scenario and where the transaction fee is minimal. We can, of course, have micropayment solutions not using blockchain platforms as well. And then we should encourage these kind of solutions to ensure that there is donation of a couple of dollars as well. Now, another challenge is that whenever we are utilizing the zakat and sadaqah funds, we need to ensure whether the funds are being used for the protection of the environment. Now, in this scenario, what happens is, even if somebody claims that the funds are going there, it's very difficult to really ascertain whether the funds are really being used to create an impact on achieving the climate goals. So what we need here is, of course, some kind of quantifiable measurement whereby we can say that, that this impact has been made. This, of course, can be used or achieved with or without the blockchain platform. Then, of course, we have the need of transparency in operations. Donors really want this, and this can be achieved by using the blockchain platform. Now, another very important challenge that we face is that of an efficient governance. So, for example, you have different offices located in different parts of the world. How do you really ensure what is happening in a certain office associated with the distribution of zakat and sadaqah funds? So basically, what we can do here is that we can use a database which kind of records the data according to the relationships between different entities. So it's called a graph database. You see this database in Facebook. So whenever you want to know about a certain individual who has been listed as a data point in this graph database, within seconds, you can get to know all the associated relationships that he has. So for example, in a certain geographical region, there is a certain zakat manager. All the people who are under him, who he's responsible for distribution of funds, you can immediately get to know. And this kind of database is very, very, I would say, very useful for detection of fraud as well. So you can come up with mechanisms to combat fraud in that scenario. Then, of course, we have laws now in many jurisdictions which talk about adherence to anti-money laundering or to counter terrorist financing. And blockchain is a very useful way to go about this because all the transactions would be very transparent. Now, we have to look at the challenges from the receiver side as well. And the primary challenge is that of financial exclusion. So the majority of receivers or the recipients of Zakat and Sadaqah fund, they don't have access to financial services. So how do you go about giving them the Zakat or the Sadaqah until and unless you give them the cash by hand? So what we can come forward with is a kind of a digital wallet mechanism. And of course, to ensure and achieve that, we need a kind of identity mechanism as well. So we should have a digital identity that we assign to each recipient, and then we can assign a digital wallet. And in order to ensure that the funds that are being given are being utilized effectively, and it's not that the person is just living on donation or zakat or sadaqah. What we need to do is that in parallel, we kind of create an e-learning or a remote learning platform whereby the recipient gets to know how to go about using those funds, start a new business, maybe start some other work. And this can really help to create employment in the market, and of course, use the zakat or the sadaqah funds very, very effectively. Then when we are talking about a graph database in the governance mechanism, there should be a kind of reporting tool by which the receivers have access to the authorities as well, by which they can complain if something is not okay. Now, we talk about the challenges in Waqf. I came upon a point by Dr. Fadad in one of the previous seminars, and he mentioned that it is important that there are a preservation of rights. Again, smart contracts on the blockchain platform are a very useful tool that can be used to achieve this. Transparency in management, again, we can use a smart contract working in synchronization with the Waqf manager. So you don't have to completely rely on the manager. And whatever he does, it's also visible through the smart contract. So there is support and validation, or let's say, as Dr. Mohiuddin put it, evidence in the form of data of what is happening. Then what we also see is that there's an incomplete record associated with Waqf. And when we use a database, whether it is blockchain or whether it's not a blockchain, but a normal database, what we will have is data associated with the utilization of the Waqf asset. And when we have a considerable amount of authentic data, what we can do is we can use machine learning on it and come forward with predictions telling us, okay, this asset is being utilized very effectively. And so the new endowments that come into place should be following this strategy. Then there's illegal invasion of Waqf assets as well. Of course, whatever has happened in the past cannot be undone, but the present and the future approach can be that whatever assets exist, we should have a proof of ownership record on any blockchain platform that you feel suitable to be used to ensure that there's a permanent record of data of ownership. Now, if in a couple of years from now, somebody comes forward and says that, that this land doesn't belong to this particular individual, you can counter that telling that the proof of ownership exists on the blockchain platform already. We put it there 2 years back. And the data there cannot be corrupted and cannot be manipulated, so it's original. Now, we also talk about the challenge of idle lands in Waqf. So what we can basically do here is we can go for initiatives whereby we are trying to do carbon offsets. So we can use the land for planting trees. And in order that the person who is giving the money to plant the trees on that idle land, we can give a kind of a virtual tour to that individual using augmented reality. And in that tour, we can show that this is the tree you have planted, and in future, this is the kind of carbon reductions this particular initiative is going to achieve. Then there are idle assets as well. For example, there's a building on the Waqf which is not being maintained very well. Now, when you have a graph database whereby you have the digital identities of all the people in need and the profile is maintained, what you can do immediately within seconds is get to know how many people around that idle asset, let's say building, are in need of employment. And then you can call them, and instead of giving them zakat or sadaqah, you can give them employment. using the funds for that, and they can try to redeem that building. So they have the employment, the building is redeemed, and then in future you can of course utilize the building for other purposes which can generate more income. And in Waqf also there's the need of impact assessment, so we can use blockchain for that. Then the last point that I want to talk about is the need for Islamic social banks, which are focusing on providing financial services with a social initiative or perspective, as well as protecting the environment. So as Mr. Dajani mentioned, we should have Sharia compliant green sukuk. And when we are having these kinds of sukuk in the marketplace, a very good way to go about it is to tokenize these green sukuk on the blockchain platform to ensure that even SMEs have the access to capital by using green sukuk. And it is not just restricted to big corporations and governments. Then we should encourage digital or neo banks to ensure that there is cost reduction. And in parallel, we are able to reach a large number of people, and even those which are unbanked and underbanked. Then when we are doing these kinds of mechanisms, because the people are living either at or below the poverty line, they of course cannot have a credit score. So for example, if they are applying for a loan, there's no way whereby you can get to know whether they should be given the loan or not. So what we can do here is that we can use alternative credit scoring methodologies. So we can use machine learning to see the digital footprint a particular borrower has and try to come up with a score or a rank telling us that, okay, this individual is trustworthy and we should go forward with giving the money to him. So with this, I would like to end, and I hope it did shed some light on the discussions we are having today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nida. It's always beautiful to hear something fresh, new, and innovative. And I couldn't, agree more than what you have presented today, bringing Islamic finance and technology together. That's quite fascinating, and I'm sure we might have an interesting discussion when we reach there. Thank you, Dr. Nida. Please stay behind. We will need you in the discussion session. You have touched on a number of issues related to the SDGs themselves, Islamic social finance, the issue of quantifiable measures, how do you even reach out to the poor, how do you verify them? That's a lot of food for thought. So ladies and gentlemen who are joining us, I can see that the number is increasing. This is the seminar number 12 on Islamic social financing and the SDGs. And we have an array of speakers already. Dr. Mahmoud Muhyiddin has spoken. We have already heard from Dr. Nida Khan. And now we are moving to our next speaker. But before we go, please, we have a comment session. Drop your comments, ask your questions, because after the next speaker, we are moving straight, inshallah, into the Q&A session. Our next speaker, as I said, is Dr. Rushdie Siddiqui. Dr. Rushdie Siddiqui is a co-founder and CEO of iPortal, and he's been a founder of many things, to be honest, and is a proven international executive with 25 years experience with work, traveled to over 25 emerging markets, and with the Fortune 500 companies. He has served in advisory capacities. He has led a number of projects, and I think is somebody that we really, want to hear from. Beautifully, he actively comments on posts on social media, on blockchain. So I like the chronology. We had Dr. Mahmoud Muhyiddin. He spoke about Islamic finance, and the challenges. And then Dr. Nida took over from there, and she ended with blockchain and artificial intelligence. Here is an expert on blockchain and the SDGs and Awqaf and Islamic finance. Dr. Rushdie, if you are ready, we have the pleasure to have you here. And I can assure you, inshallah, you are going to have some solid 7 minutes as well to make your presentation before we go into the panel discussion. Go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. Shukran. Thank you, Brother Jamil. Respected Dr. Ahmed, respected Dr. Mahmoud, respected Dr. Sister Nida. It's a pleasure and an honor indeed for me to be here to share in 7 minutes, hopefully less, a new way of approaching Waqf. When the organization asked me to talk about it, I asked if we can basically look at this particular space from the point of view of the fourth industrial revolution, carbon emissions, and artificial intelligence. So if you'll allow me to share my screen with you, then I can get going. This one. There it is. Okay. Okay. Can you see my screen, brother?
Absolutely, it's clear.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so from the Waqf point of view, what I wanted to basically talk about was three areas. The first area is where we are, Waqf, challenges on awareness, competence, and governance. What we are going to be building going forward. It's the Waqf narrative, linkages to the SDGs and data, which is something that Dr. Mahmoud talked about. If you think about Waqf, it's about impact philanthropy. If you look at what's happened in the West the last 20, 25, 30 years, the focus on impact, whether you're an NGO, whether you are a hedge fund, whether you are a pension fund, they're all focusing in on impact, trying to measure impact, and a lot of that is in the emerging markets. The 56 Muslim majority countries are emerging markets, so a lot of the US money has filtered into the OIC in the form of impact. So when I explained this to colleagues in America and Western Europe about this, I said, Islam has been doing this in the name of Waqf, about impact philanthropy. So there's an alignment of what the West has been talking about today, Islam has been doing for 1400 years. Dr. Mahmoud also talked about the SDGs. If you take a step back with respect to the SDGs and Maqasid al-Sharia, there's alignment. You're focusing on people, you're focusing on planet, and you're focusing on the pursuit of prosperity. One has a secular approach, one has a spiritual approach. Nevertheless, there is an alignment. The last aspect, which I think is extremely important, which will be the basis of what I'll talk about, is data. Data has four elements, from volume to veracity. And honestly, without data, it's just another opinion. And that's one of the things that we need to focus in on in this particular area. So Waqf 2.0 is basically moving from aggregated and snapshot data to interactive. Information today is commoditized. It needs to be insightful. One of the stakeholders in this space that we are not talking often about and not engaging with is the public. What do they know? They do want to contribute, but where do they go? The content that we see on the Waqf is often from surveys. Often the surveys are small, so sampling size error. One of the things that we're focusing in is on social media network application of artificial intelligence, and I'll get into this. The three areas that I want to take away at the end of my presentation is basically creating a Waqf sentiment index, a Waqf knowledge grid, and carbon emissions offsets, and Waqf agriculture, which is something that Sister Dr. Neda referred to. So if we look at it from the point of view of alignment about what's happening, if you look at the different stakeholders in the SDG space, there is alignment between the climate activists from Greta Thunberg to the World Bank, the IMF, the UN, to celebrities, to asset managers, but also over here from the faith-based leaders. So the SDGs, Maqasid al-Sharia, at a spiritual level, there's an alignment on the pursuit of the people, the planet, and the pursuit of prosperity. Now, if we look at what the challenges are today with respect to the Waqf, great paper from Indonesia, and it talked about what the challenges are. I come from an indexing background. I was fortunate enough to lead a team at Dow Jones to launch the world's first Islamic equity indexes and a Sukuk index. And what's needed here is a national Waqf index. And the paper that was provided by BWI basically goes into the methodology, and I thought was extremely important and influential to share with you, because we need to start talking about this. And it looked at several factors, and the outcome of it is obviously work in progress with more data, more insights, more iteration. We will get there, but nevertheless, the point here is something is being done. The approach that I've taken is basically awareness. So from an awareness point of view, we focus in on a platform economy. You know, the platform economy in the Waqf space is the way forward. If you look at what's on to the left and to the right, these are platform economy platforms. We need to look at the Waqf from a platform economy point of view. It's a triad ecosystem of the platform, the community, and the assets. The assets obviously are the Waqf. It's the community where there is more engagement that's required. So going forward, this is one of the things that the Islamic Development Bank and its influence can basically start raising the profile, putting more content into it and cascading it, where public opinion and comments will allow us to create a platform economy approach to this. As I said, the approach that we've taken is, did you know? Public interface education, extremely important. So as part of World Waqf Day, which is a platform we launched several months ago, still at early stages, the motto there is impact in perpetuity. We basically, on a fortnightly basis, post on social media information about Waqf, whether it's about Bank Islam headquarters in Malaysia, or whether it's about the health Waqf in Turkey, or whether it's about the earliest known Waqf in Egypt. The point that I want to convey is a lot of people, their comments were, I did not know. And that's an important element for engagement. We've also taken an approach of looking at Waqf from a point of an academy, a Waqfpreneur. That's basically an entrepreneur involved in anything to do with the Sustainable Development Goals and the proceeds, Waqf talks and Waqf competition. So we basically featured courses as part of awareness and education. This is an extremely important part as a ramp onto this particular space of Islamic social finance. And what we have also a project on the platform, working with Global Sadaqah, a number of interesting projects in this particular space, including one of my favorites, which is building Africa's first masjid using crypto only. The point here is most people do not know about these projects because there's friction in finding it. If we can reduce the friction on a platform, taking that platform economy approach, then what we will have is intermediation issues addressed. We've taken this one step further. On iPortal, there are about 66 types of tourism. One of the areas that we're focusing on is Waqf tourism. And we can talk about this at another point in time. But the point here is public interfacing, awareness and education, letting them know how to find out more information about this. An area that we've been working on is using AI to create a Waqf sentiment and knowledge grid. So if we look at Waqf from the point of view of a social media network, this is basically for Malaysia. What we've done is basically created a tourism sentiment index for Malaysia, which is in real time, and it is based upon social media interaction, noise reduction by artificial intelligence, and then showcasing it by way of a candlestick in time series. You'll see teardrops there, and the teardrops represent certain points where the government policies resulted in an action, and then the reaction by the social media, and we've captured this. And this is the way forward with respect to Waqf, because the information is there, but it's a vast amount of information, it's scattered information. Can we basically collate it, aggregate it, showcase it so people understand it? And if we can showcase it in capital market tools, then we are basically providing a language of understanding. And this is a knowledge grid. Again, this is in reference to Malaysia. We need to create a knowledge grid for Waqf. And I think this will help in getting all the important stakeholders, as led by the Islamic Development Bank, to talk about a same narrative. Each has a different optic. So I think going forward, this is one of the things that we are going to be focusing on, and we look forward to working with interested stakeholders to move forward. The last point that I'll talk about is something that Sister Nida and I've been working on, which is basically looking at carbon emissions. So if we talk about carbon emissions, we want to bring that to the man or the woman on the street. A calculator for someone's personal carbon footprint. And this is something that is a common phenomenon. Can we bring this into the Muslim world? because it has internet connections, it has smart devices, and people, the young people, do want to have a say-so in their future so they can modify their behavior for a better future. If we basically say that here is a calculator where you can basically put in inputs to get an output of what your carbon footprint is and then what you can do. So if we look at the carbon footprint on a per capita basis in Algeria or Indonesia, I have the numbers. Obviously, the numbers are a whole lot lower here in the Muslim world compared to the developed world for a number of reasons. The point here is when you can map it, you can measure it, then you can manage it. And that's the objective here. And then once you've got your emissions, then there's things that you can do about it in terms of offsets. One of the areas is reforestation, but we think that the application agriculture work has a bigger impact. So the model that we're working on is if we look at the pillars, the 7 verticals of the Islamic economy, and use them as a proxy of the amount of emissions that they produce as a subsector of the conventional space, each of the verticals of the Islamic economy has carbon emissions. So the first thing what we're doing is A, identifying it, and then B, saying, okay, with respect to Muslim travel, the travel space is basically a $9 trillion industry, for example, and the halal travel, Muslim lifestyle travel is about 280 billion, hypothetically, and then this is the estimated emissions from that. The next aspect is once you've basically figured out what the emissions are, you can't stop there. You have to keep going forward. So basically creating a platform, blockchain enabled for transparency and accuracy, immutability, where you're basically saying, here are the different options in terms of suggestions on offsetting it. And offsetting is an interim solution, not a final solution, because the end goal is net zero. And if we focus in on subset of reforestation, waqf and agricultural land, and in waqf and agricultural land, if you're planting saplings, they have an element of carbon sequestration. And when they become fruit-bearing as part of what the person or the entity that said for the agricultural land where the fruits, when they ripen, are sold to the market and proceeds are given to the beneficiaries, the same type of approach. And we basically look at this one step further. The materials from the fruits can also be used in modest fashion. And that is actually happening by a number of startups. And if we basically then say, can we reduce friction and create a waqf e-commerce platform for agricultural products? We can, because the technology exists, the concepts exist, it's just basically changing the theme. So if we look at this from the point of view of fusion, you're talking about carbon emissions, carbon offsets, Islamic social finance, carbon absorption by trees, reforestation, impact philanthropy, and e-commerce. Last point here is this is about engagement and transparency. And so it's an enfranchisement and empowerment of the man on the street or the woman on the street to do something because they want to do something. I thank you very much for the opportunity to share some thoughts. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Thank you so much. And this is a very large menu, but succinctly presented within a short time. And I think your presentation can be divided into several segments, but I'm glad you managed to condense it, into this short presentation. Hopefully we'll have an opportunity somewhere to have a more elaborate, discussion about this. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now approaching the beginning of the end of the seminar. We have heard from all our speakers. We have had an array of suggestions and discussions from these, beautiful speakers who have been with us from the beginning of the day to now. And now it's the opportunity for discussion and questions and answers. And we have already received some of them. And starting with Dr. Mahmoud Muhyiddin, one of our participants is asking, how can the UN implement the zakat, looking at the sensitivities around it? And also, if you can shed more light about the issue of sukuk in Islamic finance, which you have raised.
Thank you so much. Very good question, tackling two separate but important issues. Let me start with the sukuk, or the Islamic finance bonds, and I've seen the rise and the fast growth of variety of sukuk instruments. Some of them are simple, some of them are complex, but now with the emphasis on climate and climate change and managing the transition, and more important work is required, not just in mitigation, but on adaptation and managing the transition. We're seeing more green sukuk either prepared in the pipeline or being issued, and with variety of sizes as well. And some of them are being considered in local currencies, which minimizes the exchange rate risk. I'm happy to see the UN system, including the UNDP, is working on an advisory capacity for many of the potential issuers, be them governments or financial institutions, and or even localities and municipalities. There are a couple of transactions being prepared, earmarked for social development based on green sukuk. The issue here is basically about the size that's growing, about the principles. They are adhering to the ESG principles of issuance, the environmental aspect, the social aspects, and governance and transparency. And again, we see not just the Muslim countries or the members of the OIC, but other countries as well, seeing the opportunities in the market and the good liquidity, are penetrating this market. I like what I heard about the need for a legal framework, because one of the issues is basically absence of an agreed upon legal frameworks, and the standardization as well on the issuance, on the monitoring, and in the measurement of the impact. That brings us to the issues related to data and evidence on this. On the issues related to zakat, and I would add waqf to this, the examples I cited from the technical and financial work in partnership with Indonesian government in the case of waqf, the technical assessments in some of the Gulf countries, including in Saudi Arabia, in issues related to framework and the principles, could really be replicated and enhanced. Like what the two last speakers, Mr. Rushdie and Ms. Khan, mentioned, that reminds us of one of the important aspects of finance for development as well, linking it now to zakat and waqf. The finance for development framework of the UN system is not just about the financial transactions. As you know and remember, it has issues to do with trade, matters related to debt management and governance. But equally, if not more important in this context, the emphasis on STI, science, technology, and innovation, and how can we get them in order to make sure that the mobilization of finance, the handling of the financial transactions, and measurement of impact is up to the expectations of the general public or the concerned stakeholders. This is one aspect. Second thing, two important matters. The two COPs, these are the summits of climate change, are going to be hosted in two countries, members of the OIC. COP27 is going to be, inshallah, in November next year in Egypt. COP28 is going to be in November 2023 in the Emirates. There are lots of aspects of consideration here, how to finance the mitigation, like renewable energy, how to finance adaptation, dealing with the impacts of the climate crisis, how to manage the transition, how to deal with the negatives when it comes to rushing towards adhering to the climate change and the social dimensions of it. I think there will be golden opportunities, especially with the Islamic finance community, to start from now approaching the organizers of these COPs to provide examples of what we just heard, especially from the last two presentations, on practical solutions and linking them to the SDGs. And we should remember that climate change is SDG 13. So back again to those two questions, either in the sukuk side, greening them, or the zakat, and I would add sadaqat funds and their links to the SDGs at large and SDG 13 could really be better demonstrated during these events. And the UN, this is a UN track, could really be of help and support on this. I'm happy to support this as well through the CAT team leadership. My good friend Selwan Hart, if there are ideas, I can approach him directly as well, or through the organizers of the two COPs, because what I saw now of those two presentations, I see scale, I see applicability, and I see demonstration effects of things that could really be linked to the solutions. What we need now is more practical solutions.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Mahmoud. And I think your explanation relates to the next question that I'm going to ask Dr. Nida. People are appreciative of your presentation, and they said, Dr. Nida, the mechanisms you discussed are very cutting edge and forward thinking. But the question is, how can large, heavy, big bureaucratic organizations now that are used to doing business in a traditional way be nimble or a bit light to leverage and utilize blockchain, fintech, alongside Islamic social financing mechanisms? What are your thoughts?
I think the way to go about this is to go for solutions that have been developed by smaller organizations, startups, because the way these things work, in order to come up with a blockchain-based solution for a big bureaucratic organization, it would take months and even more than a year, because they would need to do the necessary recruitment, and then to do the recruitment of a data scientist, a blockchain engineer, they would need to have the HR who are skilled in those kind of recruitments. So that's a very long drawn process. In parallel, if they look at startups which are already in the technology space, they are already providing these services. So in that scenario, they just need to choose the right startup to get whatever they want to develop. And that's a very good way to go about it. They'll be saving cost, they'll be saving time, and just integrate the solution in their organization.
Thank you very much. I think this is quite succinct, and I like the way you approach the answer. So the way to go is not being the approach of the big ones. Learn from the small ones. That's a food for thought. Thank you so much. Dr. Rushdie Siddiqui, if you are with me here, your presentation encompasses many things, but I think there is something that everybody heard from you. You kept emphasizing on the issue of engagement, awareness, outreach, talking to people. This is quite really handy, and I think even in some cycles there are discussions now that to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, there is the need for SDG 18, which is communication for all, to make sure that there is awareness on all the SDGs so that they can be implemented. So, and I think your presentation is touching on that, and something that you talk about, which is key, especially in this COVID era, is the idea of a platform economy. Beautiful ideas, well presented, but the question is, how do we ensure that it's not elites talking to elites? How do the elites talk to the grassroots?
It's the opportunity for the grassroots to talk to the elites. That's the way I look at it. So if you look at engagement and you look at social media, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, there is a volume of data there. The key issue is basically culling that data with noise reduction capabilities to say, this is the sentiment of what the people want. And that information can be readily done. We've done that with respect to an area in tourism, which hasn't been done. For us to be able to do this with the respect to the WAF, then the elites will basically see on a dashboard what the thinking is from the point of view of geographies, from the point of view of topical issues, from the point of view of themes. So that becomes an extremely important part. The second aspect is behavior modification. Everyone talks about wanting to change the behavior, and the intention is there, the will is there, but the options have to be there to go from intentions to actions. And so that's missing. If we have a platform that allows you to offset your emissions by way of planting fruit-bearing trees in Waqf land, then people get excited about that. And those are the practical solutions that Dr. Mahmoud talked about that we are focusing in on. It's a platform economy approach.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rushdie. And this takes me back to Dr. Mahmoud Muhyiddin. Dr. Mahmoud, you are wearing many caps. You are a special envoy on SDGs, but you are also an expert on Islamic finance. And I had a lot of references that you have made on some of the presentations that you've made on Waqf on Islamic finance back in 1993, 2015, and the rest. The question I have is, looking at our audiences here listening, when you talk about Waqf, when you talk about zakat, even if not for social financing, even probably for cultural and religious reasons, they make sense to us. We accept them, we love them, and we would like to participate in them. But because of the hat that you are wearing as a UN Special Envoy, how can these discussions, these ideas about Waqf, about Islamic finance, migrate and flow within the mainstream to become normal, so that there will be a greater spirit of collaboration in addressing the SDGs using Islamic social finance?
Well, thank you so much. And despite the efforts that I've been making in Islamic finance, I consider myself just a student in this big field. Every day one is learning something on it, including today through these great examples, either from the introductory remarks by Dr. Marikhi or the great practical examples by brothers Rushdie and Sister Khan. But here is the thing when it comes to the demonstration effect. I think if we are constraining Islamic finance to a particular environment and particular culture, we are going to put it within unnecessary constraints. People are searching around the world for practical solutions, regardless their source. If they are proving right, if they are providing solutions, regardless of the source, they will pick it up and adapt it to the cultural needs. And that's why we see many of the good solutions, innovative ideas, even aggressive actions in applying Islamic finance with its social dimension, even without calling it Islamic finance, are coming from countries that are not members of the OIC. The good examples from Malaysia. I remember very well what Dr. Siddiqui, the former governor of Central Bank of Malaysia, Bank Negara in Malaysia, which was emphasizing the quality, the efficiency of the service. People today are not just after names and titles. They are after what they can really see of test. If it is good finance, they will be after it. If it respects the rules of engagement, if it is transparent, if it is linked to the underlying assets, if it is not speculative without a purpose, as you can really see today, they will be coming to it. But what we need here, I like what you said about communication. And whether to be an SDG 18 or basically a dimension of every SDG. At the IMF, one of the hats they are considering communication as an economic policy tool. It's not just a press release, it's an economic, let's consider a public policy tool. Mm-hmm. So I think here, and this one of the main purpose of these seminars, is to share the knowledge wider and beyond those who have been working in it. I think for decades, the Islamic finance community have been just talking to each other, or trying to see what has been established in the traditional finance and put it in a kind of a framework that is more compatible with Islamic law. That's fine. But actually what we need really to see is basically impact and scale. You are working in a financial institution. You know that when it comes to finance, small is beautiful when it comes to implementation, because that could be scaled up. but size and magnitude is very important as well. That's why we see this kind of the new ideas, the use of platforms, if you can really have some of the examples that proven right somewhere, and then you can really see them replicated. And one of the good things that we have been seeing, if the idea is coming, proven to be doing well at grassroots level, or have these kind of multi-dimension economic, finance, and social, it will be picked up. So I think it's the demonstration effect and leading by example. Even it's not going to be called Islamic or social finance, at the end is basically what we're after. And there is no better than the inclusive and broad system of the UN to have that kind of demonstration effect and platform to work with the good, of course, with the good partnership from the Islamic Development Bank and others on the court.
Thank you, Dr. Mahmoud. And I'd like to pick on a point that you have made to go to Dr. Nida, Islamic finance specialists talking to each other. Sister Nida, your presentation was very innovative in terms of capturing the use of technology and modern, and innovation and other things like that. So picking up from where Dr. Mahmoud stopped, how do we upscale that, especially to ensure that those small grassroots institutions that you spoke about created a kind of a boomerang effect that will spill over around the world, to ensure that the required changes are made, to embed Islamic finance in anything, whatever name you call it, Islamic finance, ethical finance, and other things like that, as part of the mainstream, or the mainstream actually itself.
So I think a good approach to achieve this is, of course, to first start, like Dr. Mohildeen mentioned, at the grassroots level. So you choose a certain region whereby you launch the application. And then you gather data and evidence how it is working. Is it technologically sound? Is it really doing or serving the purpose to the people? Are the people benefiting from it? And once that is done, then you can, of course, scale it and try to increase the outreach of that application in multiple areas, and not straight away launch the application in a very big geographical region. So that would be a very safe option to go about doing these kinds of initiatives to test them using the new technology.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nida. Dr. Rushdie, let me come back to you. And, ladies and gentlemen, we'll come back. Dr. Murad Day will come later with some concluding remarks. Based on some of the points that you have heard, how would the engagement, which you were quite emphasizing, be utilized really, to bring together, the point made by Dr. Mahmoud, which I am thinking about, using communication engagement as a tool of economic policy? Because you brought a number of tools that are there. So how do we make sure that it runs within the DNA and within the veins of Islamic social finance?
Okay. Thank you for that very difficult question. I appreciate that. I think the key issue is there's a lot of like-minded people with parallel thinking.
Yes.
And they're dispersed globally. The key issue is intermediation to basically reduce the costs in innovation. And that's the biggest challenge in our space. 56 Muslim countries and a lot of Muslims in the non-OIC world, great ideas, great thinkers, but there is no platform that is basically engaged, enabled, artificially intelligence powered, that allows us to basically say, here are the cullings of what the announcements have been. If you look at the startups, and a lot of my thinking is based upon my work in the startup space that have application here. If you look at Islamic banking, it has a commercial banking approach. We need to disrupt that commercial banking approach, including Islamic social finance, with a startup approach. So your question to Sister Nida, I would look at this from the point of view of minimal viable product. We look at Islamic social finance, waqf, zakat, etc., as minimal viable product, because that's about engagement. And then when Dr. Mahmoud talked about demonstration effect and scale, that's product market fit. If we superimpose those terms in this context, then it's a process-driven approach.
Thank you so much. And before I go to Dr. Merahi, I'll give each one of you a chance to say one powerful last word. It can be a word or a sentence. Dr. Mahmoud Muhyiddin.
Well, let me go before I forget the recommendation of the DSG, the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations. And we're talking about the demonstration effect. I think that $100 million, we're not really talking about billions here, we're talking about millions. I think mobilizing them based on the principles that we have been discussing during the 12 seminars, based on these kind of solutions that we heard today from Sister Khan and Dr. Rushdie, and putting it in the mind that everybody is really focusing and watching on solutions with optimism the months of Ramadan. I think it could be a very good practical answers to that. It's not about the money. It's basically about how to mobilize the money, how we are going to be allocating it. And I think that would be a great way of demonstrating and implementing what we have been saying here and put it in a purpose. There is no better today than supporting the Building Back Better based on the SDGs, supporting social protection and health service in times of big challenges. So here you can really see how the Islamic finance could provide solutions in times of need.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mahmoud Muhyiddin, for this powerful policy-focused reminder and concluding remarks. Dr. Nida, your concluding thought.
So I feel that technology is empowerment, and we should use technology to achieve all our goals, and we should be leaders in that particular domain.
Leadership, that's another good one. And Dr. Rushdie?
3 points quickly. Situation today is man's slow burn to extinction. How do we address that? We address that by taking an innovation economy approach. And Islam during the golden era age was all about that. This Renaissance approach that we must look at is going to be about the innovation economy. And the innovation economy are buzzwords that will resonate with the young people, and that's how you're going to get engagement.
Thank you so much. والآن نرجع إلى الدكتور أحمد المريخي. سمعت الاقتراحات الطيبة المتفقرة من الإخوان والأخوات الدكتور محمود محي الدين والدكتورة نداء خان والدكتور رشدي. فالآن نريد أن نسمع منك الكلمة الأخيرة.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. طيب في نهاية هذه الندوة حقيقة أو سلسلة الندوات في البداية أود أن أشكرك دكتور جميل على إدارة هذه الندوة، إدارة حقيقة مميزة، وأشكر المتحدثين دكتورة نداء ودكتور رشدي. كما أود أن أقدم شكر خاص لمعالي الدكتور محمود محي الدين على مشاركته لنا في هذه الندوة، حيث لم ألحظه معنا في البداية، فلم تسنح لي الفرصة أن أرحب به ترحيبا يليق بمقامه. فمرحبا بك في الأول وفي الآخر كذلك. فشكرا جزيلا طبعا على ما قدم يعني معالي الدكتور محي الدين، كان معنا في البداية وكان لمعاليه الفضل حيث تم تكوين لجنة برئاسة نائب الأمين العام وعضوية معاليه، وكذلك سعادة الدكتورة رولا دشتي وعضويتي. ومن هنا انطلقت حقيقة هذه السلسلة من الندوات ودخول كذلك بنك التنمية الإسلامي. واليوم نصل حقيقة إلى نهاية الندوات، ولكن هذا ليس هو نهاية المطاف، وإنما هي البداية حقيقة، لأن نحن نتطلع إلى إنشاء آلية بحيث أن هذه الآلية تكون عملية وتحقق ما يراد منها، بحيث أن احنا نتوقع أن نحصل على تقرير شامل خلال هذه الندوات. ندوة اليوم حقيقة كانت مميزة، ودائما أي ندوة حقيقة يشارك فيها معالي الدكتور محمود حقيقة تكون مميزة بالأرقام، وكذلك الستاتستيك أناليسيز التي حقيقة تكون جايد لنا. فنتوقع بأن نخرج حقيقة بتقرير شامل من الندوات ال12، وهذه حيث هذه الندوات حقيقة ألقت الضوء على أفضل الممارسات التي كيف يمكن تنفيذها، وقد استفدنا حقيقة كثيرا خلال ال6 أشهر التي يعني سبحان ربي العظيم مضت منذ رمضان إلى اليوم، مضت بشكل سريع والحمد لله. كل الندوات حقيقة كانت ناجحة، وكنا نتطلع ومتوقعين حقيقة نجاح هذه الندوات، لأن الكل يشعر بحاجة إلى وجود آلية فعلا تسد الفجوة التي موجودة لدى منظمات الأمم المتحدة المختلفة. فسيخرج إن شاء الله تعالى التقرير. هذا التقرير سيقوم بوضع خارطة الطريق، وخارطة الطريق هذه سيتم مناقشتها من خلال ورشة عمل أو مجموعة استشارية ممن لديهم الخبرات وشاركوا معنا حقيقة في خلال هذه الندوات. وأنا حقيقة متحمس جدا لرؤية هذه الآلية، حيث أنها ستساعد في استخدام الزكاة لسد فجوة التطعيم، كما ذكر معالي دكتور محمود بأن احنا فعلا في حاجة إلى how can we use يعني زكاة for the vaccine. كما احنا يعني نتطلع لسد فجوة الحاجة أو استخدام في التطعيم، أو كذلك الصدقات في خلق فرص العمل والحماية الاجتماعية. فأسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى في نهاية هذه الندوة، أسأل الله العلي العظيم أن يوفقنا لما يحبه ويرضاه، وأن يحقق لنا ما نرجوه، لأن حقيقة الذي نحن نتطلع ونرجوه فيك هي الوصول إلى آلية تقوم بخدمة من هم في أمس الحاجة إليها وإلى سد حاجتهم، سواء كانت بسبب الكوارث الطبيعية أو بسبب الكوارث التي كان سببها الإنسان. فلا يسعني في نهاية هذه الندوة إلا أن أشكر المتحدثين، وأشكر كذلك مدير هذه الندوة، كما الشكر موصول حقيقة للمترجمين الذين حقيقة تكبدوا العناء وطول الندوة وهم كذلك يقومون بترجمة هذه الندوة. والشكر كذلك موصول للأخوة الحضور الكرام الذين شاركونا كذلك في هذه الندوة. شكرا جزيلا، وأسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى أن يوفقنا لما يحبه ويرضى.
جزاكم الله خير بهذه الكلمة الطيبة الدكتور أحمد المريخي، تشرفنا بحضوركم، وكما قلت في بياناتك هذه هي البداية وليست النهاية، فإن شاء الله ننظر إلى المستقبل بإذن الله. Ladies and gentlemen, this has brought us to the concluding part of this beautiful, eventful, thought-provoking seminar, intellectually stimulating, and I'm sure it leaves more questions and more answers that I hope, inshallah, will help in building back better. Many people have contributed in making this seminar a success, a lot of them behind the scene. Muhammad Shati, Yusuf Swadi, Margaret Osborne, and a couple more have been working hard behind the scene, organizing, contacting people, and even dealing with the technology behind. We thank them most sincerely for everything. With this, on behalf of all my colleagues who contributed to this seminar, I am Muhammad Jamil Yusha from the Islamic Development Bank here in Jeddah, and I say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. شكرا جزيلا. All the best.
عليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. شكرا جزيلا. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
مع السلامة. Thank you.